about morality, when we think of morality, we think of things like sex and cheating,
Somebody does. Somebody spends a lot of time moralizing
cheating
about
on tests at
sex.
school, or stealing,
That's good.
a pack of hot dogs from the convenience store. But we don't really talk about a morality or think about morality much on the larger social level of the morality of a society.
Yeah, you don't really hear that preached much in
No,
church, do you?
or even talked about in the political discussions.
Why would that be?
The morality of how our society treats our citizens, that considering ourselves as a country, and how do we treat each other? How do we treat our workers? How do
Top
we?
50% own 98 point something percent of everything, all the wealth.
Yeah.
Top 50. The bottom 50% of our population. They're 1 in every 4 children. Recent statistic. Don't know where their next meal's coming from. There's really a groceries crisis.
Right.
I was poor when I was a kid. Man, we ate, at one point, my mother, my grandmother, this wandering gypsy team. I went to a bunch of different schools. I wound up living with my uncle and his wife and 4 kids. Greatest part of my childhood because I had like brothers and sisters. We ate, meatless meals, unless you if you were
Fat
lucky enough
back.
to get the piece of fat back with the rice and black-eyed peas. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was raised in poverty. I know what it feels like to want something. A damn Dunkin'. One sticks in my mind was a Dunkin' yo-yo. Yeah, like 79 cents. Can't afford it. A yo-yo. And that's poor.
Yeah, that's poor.
That's penny pinching.
Right.
So, but there's legions of our citizens. What kind of stable country you think you got? You really think that damn gated community years is going to keep the anger out when the steam lets loose, when it boils over? You think the National Guard's going to come down and butcher your own people by the thousands to keep from cutting your throat in your California king-size bed in the middle of the night? And even if they don't do that, what kind of life is it? You have to live behind walls. You're afraid to drive your Rolls Royce through town because of the seething anger. When people are no longer enamored of the rich ruling class, like I think that happened in France, didn't it? When the peacocks, the scarecrows had enough of the peacocks, they weren't impressed anymore. They just wanted payback.
Well, let's stay on conscience, because is an interesting question. And, it's like it's so
Yeah, well,
easy to squash it. And like, that was what I was
we talked about
thinking
how that's
about.
developed. How we learn to squash it, or do we make a pact with the devil? What is that?
Well, I think there's, for one thing, it seems like the conscience tells us we can't do all the fun things that we want to do. So that's part of the pact with the devil. Is
Yeah, like,
in
why shouldn't
order
you get
for
the
me,
cookies?
right? Like that's a good example. Mom said you get one cookie.
The Thanksgiving dinner. That's my favorite.
Well,
Tell that one.
but that was it's like the rule is there's one cookie after school. But the box is like got 20 or 30, and so why shouldn't I be able to have 5 if I'm hungry and I feel like it?
I don't hear any reason.
Probably, Mom won't even notice. And so why? So, but the conscience is I want the 5 cookies, but the conscience says I can't have it. So that's a good reason.
But wait, is it conscience, or you're going to get in trouble if you have it? I'll play devil's
Well,
advocate.
that's true. That's true. With the distinguishing between what's really right and what the rules. And see, maybe that's actually back it up a little ways. Is that there's this confusion between what that inner conscience, inner knowing of the right way to behave, and the rules that are imposed on us by mom and dad and religion and school. They try to make it like their rules are the same thing, and we know they're not. So if we reject their rules as arbitrary, well, then maybe my conscience is just as arbitrary.
The reason that this hit me was I was in the first grade. I was 6 years old. I had just turned 6, just out of my 5s.
Yeah.
And this was a real organic
Right.
surge of shame.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I'm really trying to think, and the only time I can think that I can compare it to was my first complete sexual experience when I was 11 years old. Mm-hmm. Are you with me so far, folks? Complete. And when it was completed, much to my amazement, I thought I'd injured myself. But what a way to go. There was this immediate, deep sense of shame that accompanied that.
But was that the true conscience, or was that the fact that you felt like you'd broken rules? Where I
No,
mean,
there were
are
no
you saying
rules in that
that's-
department. I never
I
got
know,
talked
well,
to
so-
about it, so
okay,
there was
well,
nothing really.
But how could that be against? I mean,
you had to be covert because there was this
yeah,
general.
anyway, we
you
can't
know,
talk about that openly enough. That's too hard to talk about.
Okay, well, back to the organic feeling of it was the same kind of feeling. It was
We
just
were
of a deep shame that I had done something wrong. Dropped. It's not okay to abuse kids or abuse anyone because they're poor.
Right.
So,
okay,
but then
well, I
over
was-
time, oh man, well, by the time I was in a couple of grades up, it was obvious that the pecking order was clearly established, and the richer, the better. I mean, they were like beacons that we aspired to.
Right.
They did no wrong.
Well, that's what I thought we were talking about was how do we squash that feeling? How do we learn to ignore it? And I was just saying that because it looks like there's a lot of payoff in ignoring it. We learned that there's
Well, is society based on that?
Right,
That money buys happiness? Who the hell doesn't believe that? You're all taught, no, it doesn't. Oh, yeah, right.
so you can, but in school you talk about in a few years later you were doing it without feeling that shame, and
That's
it's
right.
because
I was feeling my
you-
shame. I was on the bottom, or I was not on the bottom, but I was nowhere near the top.
But you, by joining in with the other kids in the ridicule of poor people, that meant you were accepted. You were part of the group,
Right.
and so you had that comforting feeling of normality and being a member that seemed better than not feeling ashamed. So you felt the shame less and less because you were feeling accepted more and more.
The membership has its privileges.
Right,
You got
right.
acknowledged by the mob.
So
when you
we-
join the mob, you're part of the mob.
Yeah. So the more you ignore it, the more the less you feel it, I would say. So it's only in extreme cases then that it really grabs you.
It's one of the things I admire about your brother, who befriended somebody who was really poor, and
Right. Actually, both my brothers did that. Both of them.
Brought them home. They became part of the family, and they were Katie's family she definitely had a sane upper middle class to lower upper class
Right. Yeah. But I mean, in my
upbringing.
we were kind of in the middle. At the school system I was in, we weren't. There was definitely people quite a bit richer than us. But I'm trying to think. My younger brother, the boy wasn't. They had a name for him. It was basically like meant untouchable. This kid is untouchable, and only my brother would be friends with him. But yeah, and my older brother, same way. I mean, the boy he befriended wasn't as shunned by the kids in his class, but he was also poor compared to us, and became my brother's best friend. So yeah, I admire that in both of them.
And of course, when I got to be a junior in high school, I mean, it was already, man, I read the right books, and I started disassociating with the herd, with the majority, and the group think that went along with it. And it was like, talk about being born again. God, it was great. Because I saw that most of what they believed in was empty-headed consumerism. Is that a real London fog? Is that a real poncho or a Sears poncho? It was all superficial. And their thoughts were superficial. My friend Jim Ballou wrote a song, rest us all, everything today is made out of plastic. Isn't that fantastic? Made out of plastic. Everything we say is made out of plastic, made out of icky sticky goo. Just superficial. Dancing with Stars, Sarah Palin, George W. Bush.
Well, I think, though, that the reason society works as well as it does, and the reason that we're not all dead, is because there is the morality or the conscience really never dies. It is there underlying all of us all the time. And most people, really try to do the right thing in their lives. I think they work hard, they raise their kids, they pay their bills, they try to be a good person. And, and I think that's why, you can drive down the road and not be killed, because everybody's like, okay, we're playing by the rules. Everyone wants to play by the rules. And it just seems like
There's just a good deal of self-preservation involved in that last example.
yeah.
But it's a willingness to accept certain rules that are objectively sound. Of course, with that, you have, 21st century where marijuana is still illegal. Whee!
Well, yeah, but, for thousands of years,
Don't ask,
people
don't
always
tell.
said that the reason, Christianity was a good thing because it prevented more bloodshed than would otherwise have existed because it imposed such tough rules of moral behavior on people.
Eternal consequences,
Right.
if you will. Napoleon Bonaparte famously said, religion is the only thing that keeps the poor from murdering the rich.
But look what's happened. All the rules of moral behavior imposed by religion have basically been lifted, and yeah, the divorce rate's gone up. But are people really behaving in a more immoral fashion now than they were 100 or 200 years ago? I don't think so.
There was probably man on dog back then.
I think there was man on, and I
Read the
think
Marquis de Sade if you want to get a glimpse of that. Try the 120 days of Sodom.
And if you look at per capita murder rates in cities, they've actually declined over the last 200, hundreds of years.
You never know it from your local news.
Right. All those kinds of statistics, and crime has decreased. But the point is, though, if morality was something that was imposed on us from the outside, immoral behavior should have exploded in the last 50 years. And
I think
and
that
it
was called the
hasn't.
60s.
But was
really
that
did.
immoral? Was loving each other immoral? Was like having,
Relations.
open relationships, is that immoral, or is that just some relic of an old religious idea of what is immoral? When you really
Puritanical.
look at what people in the
That's a good point.
60s were advocating was loving each other, nonviolence, people expressing themselves, is that immoral?
So if what I'm saying is true, if the core, our essence, our consciousness that lies underneath our subjective mind and our objective mind, our ego is merely our self-awareness. It's our perspective, not merely, maybe that's a big word. It's our sense of self, and maybe that essence in there is entirely moral. It is the source of morality, and not just what people make up through the ages, like virgin sacrifice or pouring molten metal in your mouth to get you to confess that Jesus Christ, or you're a witch, and blah, 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 blah. It is the actual source of sanity. But the source of our insanity, interimly, right now and for the last several tens of thousands of years, has been the state of confusing our subjective opinions with objective facts. An objective fact is simply something that can be consistently verified as true by an impartial observer. Consistently verified as true. Subjective opinion cannot be consistently verified as true. And yet the devil is a liar, to quote The Exorcist. The devil is a liar. But the devil will mix truth with lies in order to attack us. So walking under a ladder brings bad luck. It's a subjective opinion that is in no way consistently verifiable as true by an impartial observer. However, it has objective fact components. You can see maybe even the source of that superstition. Somebody on the ladder, you're walking under it, they could drop something on you. Or you're walking under the ladder and you bump and the whole thing falls on you.
Right.
So there's some objective, but to make a blanket statement, walking under a ladder brings bad luck, it's just totally dumbass wrong. There's no objective fact in that at all. But again, the way we are programmed as children is, look both ways when you cross the street. Pro-survival objective fact. You can consistently verify it. Take 100 mice and send them across the street and have some mice look both ways and some mice don't. Watch what happens.
Right.
anytime you want to run that experiment. That's objective fact.